Welcome to the Social Bee podcast with your host, Louise Brogan. Every week, Louise will be bringing you a podcast all about women entrepreneurs, talking about their challenges, their goals, and inspiring you to either start your own business or grow the business you have. Visit www.socialbni.com to join our community and pick up some lovely freebies to start marketing your business online today.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Social Bee podcast. Today I am bringing you a guest from somebody who I started listening to only really this summer, and I was so fascinated by the topic that I just binge listened a whole big list of her podcasts. So Melina Palmer is a podcaster. Her podcast is the Brainy Business, and you're going to be really fascinated with what she talks about today. So Melina, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you because I think a lot of my listeners probably haven't heard about what it is that you are an expert in. So do you want to introduce yourself, Melina, and really tell us a little bit about yourself and what your business is?
Yeah, absolutely. My background is in marketing and branding. That's what I got my undergraduate in, and really the beginning of my career was in that space. Mm-hmm. But I was always really fascinated with the psychology of buying behavior and why people do the things they do, and why sometimes they'll say something and do something completely different, and how that all works. And so I ended up finding a really new field that I ended up getting a master's in, which is called Behavioural Economics. And that is essentially the psychology of why people buy and how our brains work. And so what I do with my podcast and working one-on-one with clients or in public speaking is just help people and businesses to understand how the brain actually makes decisions and the small tweaks that you can make to your messaging, your pricing, your products, and everything that you do in your business to increase leads and conversions.
Yes. So it is really, and your podcast has how many episodes at this point?
62, I believe, is the most recent one recorded.
Mm-hmm. And because it is behavioral economics is a science, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, it is. It's kind of the joining of economics and psychology, and it came about because economic theories didn't correctly predict behavior because they were assuming logical people making rational choices, and since that's not really the world that we live in, you ended up with a lot of models that have what people should do but not what they will actually end up doing. And so psychologists and economists started working together or entering each other's fields to really look for these themes within the brain or concepts or anything that could be used to more accurately predict behavior. And the really great thing is what has been found is that it's, even though people are not logical, they are very predictable. And that's what the studies of behavioral economics can teach us.
Yes, I was absolutely fascinated with it. Would you suggest, if somebody's listening to this and they're ready, they're going, I want to know more about this, would you go back to episode 1 and walk through from there for your podcast?
It's funny. I know a lot of people have reached out to me that listen from, all over the world. And there are some people who feel they really want to do that way. They want to go from beginning to end. Yeah. And I think that's great. If that's your style, it's intended to be evergreen content. Mm-hmm. And if you were to go, I know there are some people that like to jump around a little bit and look through and scan and find what they want to listen to and move from one to the next. The thing is that a lot of the concepts are ones that you might not know what they're about per se. So if you see that this is time discounting versus mental accounting or anchoring and adjustment, you might not know off the bat exactly what that means. Yes. And so I think it is nice to go all the way through if that's the way that you like to do it. But if not, there's definitely still value. And I do a lot of mentions and link backs because as our brains are really complex webs of information, in every episode I end up talking about something I've either talked about previously on a dedicated episode or will kind of foreshadow and say this will have an episode eventually, and do a lot of links in my show notes, things like that.
Yeah, no, I do like that about the podcast. So for somebody who's listening to us and going, I don't really know what you mean by that. There's a brilliant example that you do about, is it like frozen Snickers or something?
Right. Yes. Which is actually in the anchoring and adjustment episode. And I know it comes up quite a bit, but essentially there was a study that was done, and this is a testament to small changes that make a really big difference. And so in this case, it was grocery store end cap displays. Mm-hmm. And so they had, in one version, they all said Snickers, buy them for your freezer. And the other half said Snickers, buy 18 for your freezer. Yeah. And as a marketer or anybody that's creating on the side of the business, it would probably take a lot for you to jump out there and use the number 18. That feels like it's very arbitrary. Someone's going to ask me why I use this, and you don't want to tie it to something. You'd probably start to logic your way into saying, you know, them is unlimited and someone could get 100 Snickers, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And what the study found was that when the number 18 was used instead of the word them, there was a 38% increase in sales. And just that was the only change. The signs were exactly the same. And the reason that this happens is because that's a high anchor in your brain. So when you see the word them, maybe it registers and gets past your subconscious brain, but it probably doesn't. And if it does, you think, okay, I'll get 2 or maybe 3. Whereas with 18, you see that and your brain, it probably makes it through your subconscious filter and you think 18, have I been buying Snickers wrong? And also that you would probably think, 18, I'm way better than everybody else. I don't need 18. I'll just get 6. And so the anchor's high. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so fascinating. So since you looked at behavioral economics, when you walk around and you see signs everywhere for marketing and selling, are you constantly thinking about the message and how the message got there?
Yes. and my husband is a saint for all the times that we'll be, going through an airport and have here, hold my purse. I need to take a picture of this advertisement. That is basically our life. And everywhere that I go, I'm taking photos of things that I want to talk about later on. So either the little tweaks or this one's good or this small change would probably boost, or that's a great example of this concept. Yes.
Yes. So in terms of turning that into a business, how have you done that? It says really fascinating science and you have a master's in. How have you turned that into an actual business?
Well, it was an interesting way, I guess, that it all sort of came about in that I left my corporate job at the same time as I started my master's, not out of a requirement or anything like that, but it sort of all happened to work out that way. Yeah. And I had been doing consulting and marketing before that and figured, I would just be incorporating this in some capacity. And I knew I was early in the field, but I figured there would be a good chunk of people there before me because all of these concepts and their tie-ins to marketing and branding and strategy and all that were so obvious to me.
Yeah.
And as I started in my schooling and was looking around at what existed, it became really clear very quickly that nobody was really in that space in a really public way yet. And the field is and was still very academic, which is great. And that has to happen. But it was obviously before the snowball was starting. And so I realized that I needed to make a shift in my own business. And then I launched my podcast and changed my own name and branding and all of that to really focus on this strategy advising and consulting and everything to just go all in on behavioral economics and business and how it all comes together. So the podcast was really the catalyst for getting a lot of that done. And I was very fortunate getting in when I did, in that it was a very, very blue ocean, and it still is. There isn't really another behavioral economics and business podcast yet. Mine's the only one.
Yay!
Yeah, hooray!
So your business, from what I can see, someone goes to your website, is it brainybusiness.com?
Yes.
Yeah. I can see that you do workshops and you speak at conferences, don't you?
I do. A lot of my work is in that speaking space and just helping more people to understand what behavioral economics even is, which is where I'm a guest on a lot of podcasts and speak at a lot of events to help spread the word so then people know that they need help and then we'll hire a consultant. Yeah.
Excellent. And I would think that you probably have loads of really funny examples. So your talks are really good.
I do make sure to keep it very light and to have fun with my presentations, in that behavioral economics does have the ability to feel like it's going to be a super boring lecture of a presentation or a podcast. And that's where I've made sure to tie it all in so that it has a lot of humor worked in and not getting too deep into any one concept.
Yes. And I think where I came across you, Melina, was actually through Nikki Rush.
I bet. She's the best. I love her.
Yes, she is a sales coach and she was on this podcast. And would you say then that her business and your business are a great connection or collaboration?
Yes. Nikki and I, we have a lot of the same underlying principles, but I really appreciate that we come at them from different angles, her from the NLP and mine from behavioral economics. And so we have different terms for some things and we can expand on what the other is doing. And I know we both refer people back and forth quite a bit. So I've known Nikki for a long time and she lives very close to me here. So
I didn't realize.
Yes, actually back in a previous life, I used to do book editing, and ghostwriting was a previous consulting type job I did. And so I edited Nikki's second book, Buying Signals, 5 or 6 years ago. That was the first project we ever worked on together.
Oh, that's really fascinating. I was just talking to a client of mine earlier who is a book editor, proofreader as well. And I'm always saying, you should do this and you should do that. It was a really fascinating thing to be able to do. And I'm such a learner. I love to read and learn and everything, like you were talking about with advertisements and seeing what's happening in all these different areas and how those items connect together. So even when I was editing books about how to optimize the dressing rooms in department stores, I was definitely looking at ways that could apply to all sorts of businesses. So it's fun for me. Do you think to work in your field with entrepreneurs and businesses, you have to also be good with words?
Yes. And I think it's very helpful. And the concept in behavioral economics is called framing. And knowing that the way that you say something is so much more important than the thing you're trying to communicate itself. And one of my favorite examples of that being if you were going to buy, ground beef or yogurt or something, but if you went to the store and there's a stack of beef that's labeled as 90% fat-free and the stack next to it is labeled as 10% fat.
Yeah.
The one that most people end up buying is the 90% fat-free. You think that sounds so much better and 10% fat sounds gross. And it's obviously the same, but our brains don't interpret it that way. And so you could be repelling people just in the way that you've presented your information, in the same way that saying, 78% of people buy products with me again doesn't sound the same as 4 out of 5.
Yes. So actually, do you know what? That's funny. There's a Pepsi Max advert going around here in Northern Ireland, and they're doing these taste tests across Europe. So they're literally setting up taste stations, I suppose. People are queuing up and they're blind tasting Pepsi Max against Coke. Well, in the picture, it's a red can, so I'm pretty much certain it's Coke.
Yeah.
And it said Belfast has spoken, 68% of people prefer Pepsi Max. And I was driving past, I thought, so 32% prefer the other one.
And you are in the minority as someone who would think that when you see 68 is pretty low to be touting that as the.
That's what I thought.
I know that's like a D in school. I don't know exactly how grading goes, but that's basically failing in my opinion.